begin my officially prepared remarks, there were some questions posed to you specifically about debt. And there seemed to be a concern about the mounting debt. And I am going out on a limb, and I am going to ask you if you are aware of how much debt we added under the Trump administration, out of curiosity. If you don't know, I know off the top of my head, but something tells me you may know.
I have an imprecise number. I bet you have the precise number in front of you, so I don't want to give you the imprecise number if you have the precise.
No. Give me the imprecise.
No, please.
Well, I'm going off of my head, because that wasn't part of what I was supposed to say. But long story short, $8 trillion was added under the Trump administration. And so I think that it is important that we focus on making sure that we're keeping our debt under control, but I think it's also important that we're honest about how that debt is accrued and make sure that we don't continue to make the same mistakes. I know that the election was brought up, and there are those that are standing by their man, but they also seem to be concerned about debt, which seems like the two don't go together, because we know that their man actually is really good at running up the credit card debt for this country, because he likes to give tax breaks to his very rich friends, which means that we don't get as much money coming through the door when they are not required to pay their fair share. So I just wanted to make sure that we put that out there first and foremost. I recently was appointed to the weaponization subcommittee. And so I'm going to have plenty of long days ahead of me, kind of like what I have here on oversight. But the point of the weaponization committee was to have a conversation about the government being weaponized in a way so that people could somehow get some personal gain, because there's this theory that this administration has somehow weaponized the government. There is not this acknowledgement that the other guy just is a criminal, because that's just too hard to believe, even though he currently is sitting in New York facing criminal charges that were not brought by the federal government, but instead by state government. Nevertheless, so when I think about weaponization, I honestly can only think about Trump and his administration and all the work that he did to harm federal employees. So to be clear, Trump's 2020 executive order would have effectively gutted civil service job protections for workers across the federal government. Trump would have created politically charged firings of potentially thousands of federal workers and made these public servants subject to the whims of a political dictator and his posse rather than the adherence of the tenets of our Constitution. So let's be clear. Individuals pursuing public service do so largely because of their belief in government. I'm sure you can make a lot more money if you just decided to go elsewhere in private industry. A lot of us could, honestly. But if this rule is implemented, it would destroy the little bit of foundation and structure public servants still have that allow them to put people over politics. How do I know this? Because Trump and his Republican lackeys stated they felt nonpartisan bureaucrats were hampering Trump's policies, and he wanted to, quote, shatter the deep state. In fact, President Donald Trump's personnel chief, John McEntee, told agency officials at a meeting to implement staffing changes and movements across the government. Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record an article from Axios stating that Mr. John McEntee, a 29-year-old at the time, a former body man to Trump, who was fired in 2018 by then Chief of Staff John Kelly, but then rehired and promoted to head the Presidential Personnel Office, directed staff to identify anti-Trumpers and stated that they will no longer get promotions and will be shifted around agencies.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. Now, Mr. Miller, can you tell us how the implementation of Schedule F would impact the morale and performance of all federal employees?
Thank you, Congresswoman. This is a critical issue and a critical question in the first week in office. President Biden canceled Schedule F. This is real for OMB. The vast majority of our staff in 2020 was being considered to move to Schedule F. I think this would have a debilitating impact on the basic performance of federal agencies. We already have a system where 3,000 different roles are for political appointees. Those political appointees are in leadership and decision-making roles overseeing their agencies. If we were to go down the path that you outlined, where there were arbitrary or political decisions made instead of decisions made around expertise and experience, it would deeply harm the institutional knowledge in our agencies, but it would also deeply harm our ability to recruit talent going forward into organizations that we want to organize around performance.
Thank you so much for your answer, and I absolutely agree. My mother has worked in I don't know how many federal agencies since I was a little girl in elementary school, and I promise you, we have changed from Democrats to Republicans to MAGA, back to all the things. But I can tell you that she is
Gentlelady's
so
time has
very
expired.
qualified to do her work, and this would be devastating. Thank you so much, and I yield.
Thank her for her service.
Gentlelady yields. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thanks for being here, Mr. Miller. So every year, the federal government obligates more than $1 trillion in federal financial assistance. Some go to grants, some go to cooperative agreements, other direct appropriations or property donations. I'm trying to understand grants. If you can help me with grants.
Yes.
How many of those in dollars? How much of that is going to grantees?
Of the 1.2 trillion?
Yeah.
I don't have the precise breakdown between grants and other forms of federal financial
Would
assistance.
that be possible for you guys to grab and get to me?
I'd be happy to follow up with you on specifics.
Great, thank you. And I'm thinking that there might be as many as 40,000 recipients. I would like to know the number of recipients as well.
We can get back to you on the specifics there as well.
Very good. And the reason I'm going that way is because I want to know a couple of things. Are these grants pursuant to administrative regulatory creation, or are they statutory animals?
Our programs are operating under statutory, under statutes. So federal financial assistance programs, there's a wide array of them.
But I'm focusing specifically on grants, not necessarily financial assistance benefits or that type of thing.
Right.
So grantees, and so the grant programs, it's my understanding some are statutorily created, others are created through bureaucratic rulemaking that they believe that they've been delegated authority on. I'm trying to get a breakdown on that. Is that possible for you to get for us?
Be happy to take back your question, make sure that we have a response. And some grants are by formula.
Sure.
Some grants are competitive grants in nature. All of these programs have the statutory authority to move forward on their federal financial assistance.
So on pages 6 and 7 of your testimony, you talk about some of the anti-fraud measures that have been put in place, and those seem to focus on the benefits that are being given as opposed to grants. And I'm wondering, what kind of measures do you guys have? Because OMB has actually indicated that there is waste, perhaps even in the grant program. And so I'm trying to understand, do you have the same mechanism in place to recover money from grantees that have perhaps defrauded or gotten outside of their lane?
So we recently announced an overhaul to our uniform grants guidance. We worked with the Inspector General community on that, so that by simplifying the guidance, we made it easier for inspectors general to do their jobs and identify areas of waste, fraud, and abuse. One specific that I would note is...
So okay, I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off, but there is another area I want to get into. So I would love any additional details that you might want to send memo form to us that I would include as part of the record, if that would be possible, Mr. Miller.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So since the Hamas attacks on Israel of October 7th, there have been reports of federal employees calling for walkouts. Federal employees have also been circulating open letters, albeit anonymously, voicing strong opposition to the president's policies in Gaza. Federal employees have First Amendment rights. I recognize that, the same as every American does. But they can't strike. And with that in mind, what, if any, action has been taken to identify federal employees who engage in illegal job actions in protest against the president's policies in Gaza?
Chair, I understand, or Congressman, I understand the question and the concern. I'm not familiar with specific actions that were taken.
Is there a way you could...
Agencies should have procedures in place to make sure that their employees are complying with their responsibilities, including some of the responsibilities you noted.
So would you be able to find out if there are policies in place and if there's been any action based on those policies for us?
I'm happy to take that back, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And so when you take it back, as everybody up here knows, everybody tells us, we'll take it back and we'll get back with you. I'd like to ask you if there's maybe in a couple weeks we can get an answer to these questions that I've been posing to you. Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Great. And additionally, we'd like to know more about anything related to any kind of these employee actions. So look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Miller. And with that, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time, and I'm going to recognize for a closing statement.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that.
Oh, Ms. Stansbury's gotten.
Oh, yep.
Sorry, didn't realize that.
Yeah, before she goes, could I just
You got some
submit for you?
submit some-
Yes. Article from the Washington Business Journal called "The Benefits of Project Labor Agreements Along with the Myths." An article from the Economic Policy Institute called "Project Labor Agreements on Federal Construction Projects Will Benefit Nearly 200,000 Workers," and an article on project labor agreements and community workforce agreements from the Center on American Progress.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you. And I now recognize for 5 minutes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansbury.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Miller. It's wonderful to have you here today. As a proud OMB alum and former civil servant serving in this great nation's government of ours, I'm especially happy to have the final word here in the committee before closing statements. I served at OMB between 2011 and 15, and I was a program examiner in the OMB Interior Branch. So it's wonderful to be able to be on this side and to say thank you to all of your staff, and of course to anyone who's watching back in the EEOB or the NEOB. Hi, friends. I want to just take a few moments to talk about the importance of the civil service and the attacks that we saw in the previous administration. As you are well aware, in October of 2020, then President Trump issued an executive order that sought to turn our federal workforce into partisan loyalists. Thankfully, Democrats in Congress worked to prevent implementation, and the Biden-Harris administration revoked this order almost immediately when they came into office. But it went far beyond that executive order. We saw during the Trump administration that across the federal service, there were heads of agencies and departments that were moved within the SES bands, and whole agency headquarters were moved to different cities and states with the intention of trying to get civil servants to quit their jobs because they couldn't fire them. It was a massive disruption to the federal workforce. Thousands of people left their jobs, and part of why we're still struggling under the current administration to catch up on so many vital services is because of the actions that were taken. And I know, Mr. Miller, you're serving in a political role, but talk to us about the importance of our civil service. What is their role within the federal government, and why is it so crucial that political appointees don't serve in every single role that the federal government does?
Thank you, and thank you for your service at OMB. We're proud of all of our alumni. The effective performance of our organizations, this is true in public and private sector, is based on having strong teams and strong culture. Within the federal government, we have a 140-year tradition of a nonpartisan service system based on merit, that we look at people's skills, their expertise, and their experience. We want to cultivate that irrespective of what their personal views are. We want our teams to bring that to the office every day. I know as a leader and a manager, I want a team that gives me their very best, that gives me their real views, even if those views are in disagreement with my own, because I want the best advice in making decisions about what we need to do going forward. We have 3,000 different roles where we have political appointees fill them in leadership positions across agencies. They are responsible for setting the agenda, for leading those agencies, for ultimately being the decision makers. But the institutional knowledge and the expertise of our civil servants is critical to the well-functioning of our government, whether that's providing good customer experience at a call center or that's delivering relief after a disaster. Having our civil servants know that they are there based on their merit is critical to well-performing organizations, irrespective of who is in the White House.
Thank you. And, I would add to that, not only are they kind of the heart and soul of these institutions themselves, they're the institutional memory as well as the folks who know the law and compliance with the law. And, I left OMB in 2015, as I said, and then went to the Hill before I moved home. And I was struck during the Trump administration when some colleagues of mine who were civil servants within OMB were raising alarm bells about nefarious actions that were happening with politicals under the Trump administration. And in fact, months before the news broke, I was hearing from folks that the politicals at OMB were trying to use apportionments to violate the Budget Control Act, basically to withhold aid to Ukraine. Now, there's probably no one in this room except for me and you and the staff sitting behind you that know what an apportionment is, and that's because that's the institutional memory and functioning of how OMB releases funds that are appropriated by Congress. So if we need any example of why we need a civil service, how about following the law and making sure that no U.S. president ever again can violate the law and withhold aid to a foreign ally in its efforts to try to hold back an adversarial nation. I mean, this is literally global democracy on the line. So I appreciate your service. I appreciate the service of all of our colleagues. And with that, I yield back.
General yields. And now for a closing statement, I recognize the ranking member.